Hello everyone, I'm Matthew Taylor, Chief Executive of the RSA. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this evening's special event. Can you make sure your mobile phone is switched to silent? We're live streaming tonight's event, so hello to our web viewers. If you want to join in the conversation in social media, the hashtag is RSA Smith. Now, housekeeping notice is over. It's my very great pleasure to introduce this evening's event, which is organised with the Environment Agency. It's a great pleasure to welcome Lord Chris Smith, the agency's chairman. Nearing the end of his 6-year term as chairman, Lord Smith calls for a new policy importance for environmental issues and concern. What can be done to re-energise the discussion, engage the public, and bring a new consensus behind the need for action? I could, of course, introduce Chris to you at length in terms of his illustrious career, but let's get straight to the chase. He's going to speak for 25 minutes. I'm going to ask him a couple of questions, and then we're going to open it up for you to join in the conversation. And I hope you'll stay on at the end, because the Environment Agency is also kindly sponsoring a drinks reception downstairs. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Chris Smith.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Matthew. There was a time about 4 months ago when I could only be introduced as either embattled or beleaguered. That time, fortunately, is now behind us. But we did have a very challenging time through the winter months here in the UK. I remember on one occasion I went on Newsnight with Jeremy Paxman. The flooding in both Somerset and the Thames Valley was in full flow. And his first question to me was, well then, who's to blame? To which I said, it's the weather, Jeremy. He was, I fear, unusually for Jeremy, falling into the blame game trap, which too much of our politics at the moment falls into, and too much of our media commentary falls into. But it was indeed the weather that was to blame, because during the period from the start of December through to the middle of March, we had a conveyor belt of extreme weather hitting the UK. It started with the biggest storm surge on the East Coast that we have seen for 60 years, in many places higher than the tragic surge that affected the East Coast in 1953. On Boston's stump, they carve marks of where the water gets to at successive flooding events. The mark for 2013 is considerably higher than the mark for 1953. So that was the start, the big storm surge. That was followed by huge storms over Christmas and New Year. That was followed by another set of high tides at the start of January, followed by the wettest January and February we've experienced for 250 years, accompanied by, on occasion, the biggest waves ever recorded hitting the south coast of England. And then, of course, the final twist in the tale, the levels of groundwater rising to unprecedented levels. That whole series gave us the wettest, the longest, the worst, the highest, the most difficult of a whole succession of weather events. The Thames Barrier, which when it was first opened, was raised on average at most once or twice a year. In the course of 3 months, was raised and lowered 50 times. This was exceptional weather. And we weren't alone around the world in experiencing exceptional weather. The east coast of the United States was experiencing the worst freeze that they've had in decades. The heart of Australia was melting. There were serious floods, and there have been serious floods across much of Europe. I think that we are indeed seeing the first impacts of climate change, because the science of climate change tells us very clearly that we are going to experience more extremes of weather, more floods, more droughts, more erratic and extreme weather patterns. And let's just remind ourselves of the climate change indicators around the world. Globally, each of the last 3 decades has been successively warmer than any preceding decades since 1850, when reliable global records began. Also globally, May this year, 2014, was the hottest May on record. 13 of the warmest 14 years on record have all occurred in the 21st century. The only one of the 14 not in the 21st century was in fact in 1998. At the end of the summer of 2012, Arctic sea ice was at its lowest extent, only just over half the average lowest extent from 1979 to 2000. And over the last 2 decades, sea level rise has been around 3.2 millimeters per year, nearly twice the average rate from 1901 to 2010. Those are just a few of the signals of what's happening to our planet. The World Economic Forum has recently published a document setting out the 10 top global risks in their view. 4 of those top 10 global risks are climate-related. They include water crises, failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation, greater incidence of extreme weather events, and food crises. That's not Greenpeace, it's not Friends of the Earth, it's not campaigning green organizations. That is the World Economic Forum. The world of business, in fact, gets all of this much better than most politicians do. Increasingly, firms around the world are thinking about their preparedness for what climate change is likely to bring. They're looking at possible impacts on their supply chains. They're looking at the resilience of their suppliers, services, and indeed of their customers. They're thinking seriously about the energy, transport, and water use and costs that they have. And, crucially, they are understanding that doing things more greenly is also doing them more cheaply. Why then is the political world not taking this up more vigorously? Because they aren't. The environment is low down on the list of public issues for politics and for government. And I have to say, the government, despite some brave statements at the outset, they were going to be, remember, the greenest government ever, have done disappointingly little to live up to that ambition. The Green Deal, for example, has been a pale shadow of what it could have been if we were going to get serious as a country about energy efficiency. And the drive from Mr. Pickles and others against renewable energy, it does, I'm afraid, make me very disappointed. I have to be fair and to say that the opposition is not giving the environment very much of a push either. This is a failure across the whole of politics. So why this overall lack of interest from the politicians? Well, I think there are a number of reasons. The first is the opposition to climate change, or at least the opposition to the recognition of climate change. The climate skeptics are given far more credence in the public discourse and far more airtime than they really should. The overwhelming scientific consensus is that climate change is real and it's happening. The way in which anything that, for example, Lord Lawson or Lord Ridley say are pounced upon by the media and blown up into some sort of major statement, this is not sound science. You have only to look at what's happening in America with the attitudes of the Republican Party in its entirety and the attitudes of some of the Rust Belt state Democrats to see that climate skepticism is not something that is going to go away in a hurry. I say in the context of that, hurrah for Barack Obama and his recent decision to use the Environmental Protection Agency and his executive powers in order to make some progress on combating climate change. So that's one reason, the degree of and credence given to the opposition, to the skeptics. Second reason, we thought that the Climate Change Act had it sorted. It was a groundbreaking piece of legislation. It was a brilliant thing for the then Parliament, now some 6 years ago, to do. It went through, remember, with only 4 members of Parliament voting against it. It was a substantial bit of consensus lawmaking of its time. But we sort of then gave up. We thought, well, we put that on the statute book, and then as a country we didn't go on to do more. Legislation is only the start. It's action that has to follow. Third reason. Too often we portray climate change and its consequences as a nightmare. People don't like listening to nightmares. They don't want to believe in nightmares. They want to believe in hope. They want to believe in something different, something better. On the whole, voters vote for dreams, not for nightmares. So, and in this whole field, there is hope. I'm going to come to that in a moment or two. But we need to be better at articulating the debates and discussion around climate change in that context. Fourth, there are some people who regard environmental concern generally, and climate change in particular, as something of a conspiracy of the elite, the chattering classes, the sophisticated, the upper middle classes, not sufficiently connected to all the people of the country. I think they're wrong on that, and I'll say in a moment why I think they're wrong. And there's the fifth point, which is linked to that. And that's that we don't make the environment and climate change real for people, mattering to their everyday lives and their everyday experience. We're too generalist in the way in which we talk about it. Mention the environment or climate change, and people's eyes tend to glaze over. But talk to them about their own little patch of environment, about the river at the bottom of their village, or about the landscape that surrounds where they live, or about the urban streetscape and the way in which it's fashioned. Talk to them about their bit of environment, and they become really passionate about it. They're committed to it. They worry about it. They hope for it. They know what they want to change. Now, the secret for politics is, can we link that passion for the local bits of environment with the general principles that have to surround it? The public are concerned about all of this. They're keen to see progress. and politicians should not think that the public don't care. In a way, I think, although voters don't see the environment as an overt national priority, I do think they see it as an underlying sine qua non, something that has to be looked after, that has to underpin everything else. They're aware of it. They know about that, and they don't want it not to be cared for. They may not tell the pollsters that it's top of their list, but they want to see it being looked after. So I said there is hope in all of this field. It's not just something about going to hell in a handcart if we're not careful. Where is the hope? Well, there are three bits of hope in particular. The first is that the environment has been improving over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. And by environment, I'm thinking about air and water quality and looking after our land. Part of that is down to the hard work of the Environment Agency. But look at the major successes. The reduction in sulfur dioxide emissions, something like 60–70% over 10 years. Reductions in nitrogen oxide levels. The reduction in numbers of pollution incidents in discharges to river. The improvement in water quality and in bathing water quality. The return of fish to rivers from the Thames to the Mersey. And now the fact that otters are in every single county in England, which could not have been said just a few years ago. We do have a cleaner, better place here in the UK, and we've done that through a mixture of action, hard work, regulation, and bringing pressure to bear on polluters. That's a success story. It's something that can be done. So in thinking about how we take the environment forward, and in particular how we tackle climate change, thinking about that success story and the combination of the regulatory, funding, action, pressure on polluters role that we've played, that's the secret. That's how we get to success in this. Second, there's a huge economic opportunity for us in environmental improvement and tackling climate change. Saving money on existing processes and products. That doing things more greenly, meaning doing them more cheaply, point that I made earlier on. But in addition to that, there are new products and services to be brought to market. Now, we're not terribly good at bringing new products to market in this country. We did a lot of the early research on wind power. We then allowed the Danes and the Germans to get ahead of us and make all the wind turbines. Let's not make the same mistake, for example, with tidal and wave power, where at the moment we lead the world in research. But let's not make the mistake of not then exploiting the opportunities that come. And third, there is a chance, I believe, for the UK to lead on all of this, to take a global role in something that is beginning to be picked up all around the world, even in some of the heavily polluting countries. So, what do we want from government and politics in relation to the environment going forward? Well, I've set out a 12-point plan of where I think government needs to go on this. And here it is. Number one, take on the skeptics and do it vigorously, vociferously, and all the time. Make the case. Don't yield assumptions to those who want to deny that climate change is real. I would say exactly the same about some other aspects of politics, actually. The response to UKIP should not be to try and out UKIP. The response should be to take them on, to show why they're wrong. So, take on the sceptics, number one. Number two, don't give up on international negotiation. The other countries around the world are changing. Not just the progress in the United States with Obama, but look at China and the amount that China is now investing in wind power, in renewable energy,